So when we are going forward in our exploration of 1 John, we've heard a lot of study on the word agape. We've been talking about love for one another, love for the world, love for God, and this is all encompassing in that word agape. And I would translate the Greek agape into compassion, into giving, into putting everyone in a community where we are all possessing equity. So I don't want to say equal, I want to say we possess equity when we're living with agape, the agape commandment. So today we break off from that love because we've been finding many different ways to love each other with agape through 1 John. And we come here to 1 John 5, 1 through 6. And the author here is still focusing on agape love, but we're going to branch out into a very specific word, and that is spirit. So the focus of today is spirit, and I'm going to remind us today that when this letter was written, this is before we developed doctrine into the Christian church. There was no sense of the Trinity yet when Christians were first meeting in homes and we were hiding from persecution. And so there was no time to really form a doctrine, but the author here is going to introduce the formalization of pneuma, which we would call the Holy Spirit. But I think when we translate this passage, a lot of times the translators will just take it for granted that pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, is the Holy Spirit when written about. But it really wasn't. So we're going to explore the differences in that. And we're not going to take for granted the concept of the Trinity. We're going to leave it where it is, outside of this sermon and outside of our worship for just a second, because we really want to know exactly what the author is talking about. So I'm going to read 1 John 5, 1 through 6, and the topic heading is called Spirit is the Truth. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God. And everyone who loves the parent loves the child. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey God's commandments. For the love of God is shown when we obey God's commandments. And God's commandments are not burdensome. Let me write that down. I'll say that again. God's commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God conquers the world. And this is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. Who is it that conquers the world but the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? Jesus is the one who came by water and blood. Jesus Christ, not with the water only, but with the water and the blood. And the Spirit is the one that testifies, for the Spirit is the truth. A lot of repetition there, and we'll unpack that a bit. So what we've been finding out really from the author of 1 John here is that all of his arguments are cyclical. And you notice there's a lot of that repeating in there. And what he's attempting to do is really hammer in the message that we focus on God's love and the commandments that God gave us. And that would bring us to a fuller life. So he's really pressing into the people he was first writing to to tell them, hey, don't give up. There's been a lot of arguments going on, but what is the most important thing? And that is God's love for each and every single person. Because people were already arguing about who was Jesus. Was Jesus the Messiah, or was Jesus just some guy? So there's been arguments already, and I was stating that we really didn't have doctrine yet in the Christian world here, but people were already arguing about it. So there is always this semblance of cultism within the human experience. We all want to say, hey, are you a Christian? And then we will go, yes. And some people will go, well, what kind of Christian? I think I've used the example of Raised with Wolves, that sci-fi show, where instead of people just meeting each other and talking about each other and getting to know people, the first thing they do when they walk up to each other is, hi, my name is so-and-so, what denomination do you belong to? Because the world, the earth back home, has been devastated by Protestants fighting against each other. And we kind of get that on a smaller scale here now. But the writers of that show were really looking into the future, thinking if we don't stop this mess, this is what it's going to look like. So the author of 1 John would really make an impact on that world that I was explaining to you. And he has those fighting words, doesn't he? He says, whatever is born of God conquers the world. Whatever is born of God conquers the world. And if you take that in the wrong way, it really could mean, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, let's have a war. But he's not really saying that. I think conquer is a bad translation. When I look at the Greek here, I see more of whatever is born of God will prevail in the world. So there is something special about this new Christian message that he really wants to press upon this. This is the victory, he says, that conquers the world. I think I would rather say this is the story that will prevail in the world. And it is our faith. In our faith, not my faith, not Carol's faith, not Shirley's faith, not he who shall not be named faith, but our faith. And what that reflects back to is Jesus said we were all united. Jesus prayed that they all may be one. When these writers, or when Christ was teaching us in person, if they had got wind that we were going to form thousands of denominations in his name or their name, they would have gone ballistic. Denominations don't exist in the Bible, and they shouldn't exist now, because we should all just be one. That is the message that was pressed upon us. So let's go back over the little sections here. So first off, we go, whoever loves the parent loves the child. This might be a talking about, well, I love God, therefore I love Christ. So I don't want to say whoever loves God should love Christ. I think I would rather say whoever loves God can love Christ. Because the writer here is not trying to disavow the Jewish faith. The writer here is saying there's a whole lot of possibilities for faith. And there can be other faiths in the world, as long as we have agape for each other, they're all valid. And I could be branded as a heretic for saying that. I'm not going to do that. Because what other message do we need to bring about unity in humanity and Christianity? The love of God is shown when we keep God's commandments. I changed obey to keep. It's a nicer word. It's not like this, But God's commandments are not burdensome, he also says. Do we remember Jesus? And I'm going to specifically tell you Matthew 23, and you're going to know what I'm talking about because everybody has memorized the book of Matthew, right? Yes, you all have. You all agree. Matthew 23 has examples of Jesus telling the religious leaders of the day, you're making this too hard. You're making God's love burdensome. So that's what the author of 1 John is getting at. God's commandments aren't burdensome. If you have agape love, they're going to come with you naturally. So it's a natural progression. It's not, you gotta do this or else. That's not what faith is. That is burdensome. Faith is, I am so thankful for my life that I want to give back. That's what the Christian faith is. Genuine faith, this author is trying to say, is firmly connected with the action of loving. So faith is not just some weird word or not an absolute. Faith is very much a very active verb, and it needs to be done. It needs to be acted upon. And I really like verse 4, for whatever is born of God conquers the world. And remember, I said I would rather say prevails or overcomes the world. So whatever is born of God is firmly connected. But the author is saying, we're not conquering evil by military might, and we're not conquering evil by doctrine. So when we say there are a set of rules we have to obey in order to be a Christian, the author here would go nuts if he heard somebody preaching on that. Doctrine coerces us. Doctrine gives us rules that are burdensome. So the author has said, pass that by, remain faithful to love. So God prevails over the world. God's love prevails over the world. The last thing I want to talk about is that word spirit. So the last statement of this passage is, for the Spirit is the truth. What do they mean by spirit? What does this author mean by spirit? And I notice in the NRSV, which I preach out of, spirit is capitalized. So the author, or the person that interpreted this Greek, capitalized spirit from their own feelings. I prefer not to capitalize spirit, and this is a boring detail, but it's very important, okay? We don't capitalize spirit because spirit means pneuma. It does not mean the Holy Spirit. Pneuma is the rational soul, the principle of life in one's heart, mental disposition, okay? So our rational soul creates truth in us. So this could say, okay, spirit is pneuma and truth is aletheia. You don't care about that, I know. But what it really means is, yes, it means truth, it means state of mind. It also means free from deceit. Okay? So the rational soul is free from deceit. That makes a whole lot more sense to me than the spirit is truth. What spirit? Whose spirit? Our rational soul is free from deceit. So if we just think about this, let's be rational Christians for a second. How do we get things done in the world to make it better? Do we tell people you're going to hell if you're not a Christian? That's not rational. How do we get things done? We show love to the world and we get better results. There's 10 million sayings out there. You catch more bees with honey or more flies with honey. Sorry?
Than vinegar?
Oh, honey than vinegar, is that what it, yeah, nobody wants to be vinegar, everybody wants to be honey. And I'm so very lucky, I am allergic to bee stings, but I'm not allergic to honey, so I use it a lot in my cooking. You catch more bees with honey rather than vinegar. I'm probably butchering that thing. But that makes sense, that's rational, isn't it? So when I hear people going, oh, I wish they knew Jesus, and I go, how do you know they don't? Because we can believe in Jesus the man and what he said. And by the way, he didn't say anything about doctrine. He didn't say a whole lot of stuff that we have rules about these days. It was simple. Jesus said, love one another. That's the truth. So you can believe in Jesus the man, or Jesus as the Son of God, or you could believe in Jesus as the concept. So I would dare to say the author of 1 John really wanted to know Jesus was the Messiah. But if you believe Jesus is the Messiah and don't have agape love in your life, then you're not doing it right. We practice our faith free of rules, and I think Paul would have called it a love feast. Give as much love as we could put out there, and the world will be a better place. We don't need incendiary comments. We don't need absolutisms. That doesn't go anywhere. It just makes me angry and less likely to talk to somebody, really. Finally, I read this quote. It was another pastor, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name. But he said this, and I really love it. There is no need to panic or argue. Focus on living your faith. That's not my faith, and it's every person here has their faith. So don't panic. Don't argue. Focus on living your faith, our faith.